Hello, welcome back to another episode of the Debatable Discussions podcast. It's been a while since we've recorded, but we're back, rested and ready for another sort of summer series of the podcast. What are we talking about today, John?
So yes, as you mentioned there, Diane, we've got a very exciting series of summer episodes coming out. We're going to have some very perhaps memorable and familiar guests, but also some ones who we've not had on the podcast yet before. However, today we're going to encounter the branch of philosophy, which is aesthetics. Now, before we delve into this, Diane, I think I'll offer our listeners and ourselves a bit of a refresher on what aesthetics is. So it is the branch of philosophy which studies art, beauty, and taste, and importantly, how us, humans, respond to them. So it helps us to understand things such as why we create, why we value, and why we are moved by artistic and seemingly beautiful things. There are a variety of key scholarly opinions from the likes of Plato, Aristotle, Kant, Nietzsche that we'll also sort of use throughout. But firstly, Diane, I thought we'll jump straight into the fire. And we can go with perhaps what is the value of art and what makes something a work of art?
Okay, well, I think the value of art has got a couple of reasons. Number one is a sort of historical, maybe representation of how life was.
Yeah.
If you look at artists such as Caravaggio, he depicted a lot of sort of real life people. If you look at Rembrandt's The Night Watch, I know that's one of your favorites.
Yeah.
That is a sort of historically accurate representation of a sort of a time period, of a place, of a sort of profession. But then there's also the other reason, which is perhaps to send a political message. If you think about Picasso's Guernica, it's probably one of the most famous ones. And a lot more, especially modern art, has sort of these political undertones of sort of showing something apart from what is visible, showing the invisible. So I think that's what art is, actually. It's showing the invisible through the visible. It's
Yeah.
showing something bigger, deeper through a simple picture.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And I think a sort of idea which encompasses what you said, which I personally agree with, is that art is almost a means of communication. Like with sort of language in a way, we make these sort of invisible, not tangible ideas. We make them literal things by speaking them. And I think art is the same. It expresses an idea in reality. And therefore, I think all art by extension has meaning. There's things people will say things like, oh, is it Duchamp's fountain? A sort of, well, perhaps rather meaningless for many sculpture of a urinal. However, even that, in my opinion, is a work of art. Because I think the point of art is it's just got to communicate something. It's got to communicate a message.
Yeah.
What do you think about that, Dan? Do you think there's a threshold for which something becomes art? Or can we just label everything as art?
Well, I think it's difficult, right? Because some people may sort of look at a pen such as this. Well, why isn't this a work of art? Well, because it's sort of mass produced. I think for something to be a work of art, it has to have a sort of rather unique or at least exclusive notion. So
Yeah.
the reason why Picasso's paintings are Picasso's paintings because there's one, maybe two, maximum three in the world that look like that. There aren't billions. Same with sculptures, same with sort of other paintings, other works of art. The main notion is that it's got to have something unique. It's not gonna be mass produced, because I think if something's mass produced, then that loses some of that meaning of art, because it's not something you look at. It's more sort of usable item.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Not that art can't be a usable item.
Yeah,
You know,
I
I
agree with
think
you.
if you look at sort of Mont Blanc pens, people would say they're art, but they're also usable. But the thing with Mont Blanc pens is that they do have that sort of exclusivity about them. They're very expensive. Very few people have this sort of exact same model as each other. And that's why they're a work of art, because there's a complexity to it and it's not mass produced. I think that's the sort of two qualifiers for me.
Yeah, I agree with you in particular surrounding that idea of art has to be distinct in a way. It's got to be this idea of exclusivity, not in a sort of elitist manner, but rather in more of a physical sense. And that is
Yeah.
that it's not a mass produced thing, but rather it's something individual that has been created to have a set purpose. Because I think, in a way, everything you could say has a meaning. However, art is something which deliberately one creates it to have a distinct meaning. It can be a usable object, like a pen, I'm sure. Someone could say this is a sculpture, but you have to distinctly and exclusively state that this pen is a sculpture. And I think, yeah, it's a sort of difficult threshold to make. And a common critique amongst many for art is that, well, anything can be art. But as you and me said there, Diane, no, not everything can be art, because art is the deliberate expression of ideas, which
Yes.
has to be done, as you said, in that more exclusive or distinct manner. Following on from this, we've sort of talked about this idea of aesthetic judgment, and that is obviously how we judge art. So, do you think aesthetic judgment is universal or personal?
Well,
It's a bit of a loaded question, I must say, yeah.
because I think there are objectively some things which are not beautiful. Objectively. But I don't know if that's true, actually. I think a spider, if you look at a spider, I think 99 people would say that's not a beautiful thing. But I'm sure there'd be one person who would disagree. So, no, I do think it's subjective. I think the subjectivity sort of differs. If you're asked, okay, which painting is better, then yes, that's a very subjective thing. Which sort of dish do you like more? It's a subjective thing. I think the subjectivity sort of fades away a little bit when it comes to comparing two different things. For example,
Yeah.
do you find a lion more beautiful than a cockroach? Do
Yeah.
you find a sort of dog more beautiful than an ant? I think that's when the subjectivity fades a little bit because this sort of difference is quite big.
Yeah.
But they're still there. I mean, I'm sure some people prefer ants to dogs,
Yeah.
and that's completely fine.
Yeah. I think this is an interesting sort of debate that has been ignited throughout philosophy for quite a while. Plato, in his theory of forms, he said that beauty and the truth, they exist, but they exist in this sort of abstract realm that's detached from the physical world, and that almost
Yeah.
objects beauty we can't understand. Whereas someone like Kant, or actually, sorry, Nietzsche, believed that art's sort of a reflection of reality, and that it is more objective, the meaning of art. I sort of agree with you, Dan, in the sense that I think there's a underlying subjectivity that's always
Yeah.
there with aesthetic judgment. I think there are things which we can just class as beautiful, like a sunset, like,
But
you know,
if you're asked which sunset is more beautiful, then that's a
that's a subjective thing. And also,
decision.
I'm sure there is
Yeah,
someone who doesn't find a sunset beautiful as well.
exactly.
It's this sort of subjectivity which underlines it all. Another ethical theory, which I've actually studied at school, but sort of comes into play here, is John Stuart Mill, perhaps known as the creator of rule utilitarianism. But also, he sort of articulated a theory called naturalism. And this is the idea that
Yes.
things such as beauty or good, we objectively know what they are from the natural world. And that is because we can see and we can understand what beauty or good is clearly by looking at the natural world. Beauty, perhaps a sunset, or I don't know, a nice plant. What do you think of that, Diane?
Well, and Mr. Mill don't usually agree. And that's this is another case of that. I don't think you can objectively, naturally call something. I mean, yes, do you call something beautiful? Yeah, but I don't think that's universal rule. I think, if you and me were raised completely on two different islands by ourselves,
Yeah.
magically raised, and that you have no interaction from anyone, but somehow you just have food and everything you need, right? And then we grow up, and for example, we're at our ages now, and we say, I really like this tree because I've lived on that island, and I like that tree because of the memories I had in that tree, That is, I don't know, something, whatever. There was a big rain, I hid under that tree from the rain, and that's why I like that tree. You, who lived in a completely different place from me, would not have the same aesthetic judgment and say that tree's beautiful. You'd say it's a tree. It's not a really good tree. On the other hand, if you lived in Fiji, for example, you would say, I really like the sand. I lived in the mountains. I said, no, I don't like the sand. It just gets in your feet. I don't like it. So I don't think the problem with Mill's naturalism isn't the fact that it's a sort of instinctual choice. Although that's partly the problem, because apart from that instinctual choice, you also have the sort of memories and nostalgia that comes from a thing. But it's more this universal aspect of it. Because beauty can never be universal due to our different sort of, frankly, geographical backgrounds. So, as I've given that example, I'm on a completely different sort of island from you. We don't have the same object, therefore, we don't classify the same things as beautiful and not beautiful. Apart from that, Mill also forgets to mention this aspect of, for example, I don't know, why do people find some things beautiful? Well, they're not beautiful instinctually. I'm sure there's many examples. For example, you're getting gifted a bracelet, right? Now, if you're anything like me, I hate bracelets. I don't like them at all. But if that bracelet comes from a loved one and has a memory behind it, that suddenly becomes a beautiful bracelet, even though it would never have been a beautiful bracelet without the sort of emotional baggage, if I can say that, in a non-pejorative way, the emotional baggage that that bracelet has. So I think, Mill's somewhat there, but there's two big issues.
Yeah. And yes, I do agree with what you said there. And that is that one's own subjective experience of the natural world does make Mill's sort of objective idea of naturalism quite wrong. Similarly, the philosopher G.E. Moore also critiques Mill's naturalism, and actually he lent his name to his own naturalistic fallacy, which he said Mill committed. This fallacy is similar to what you said there, Diane, and basically says that in every sort of natural realm, there's ultimately subjectivity, and that we can't compare the natural world to the world, to morals, for example, like good or bad, which we want, because it's ultimately subjective. One cannot agree on what is
Yes.
good or bad. These things cannot be deduced from the natural world. And yes, that's what he said Mill
Yes.
commit,
Yes.
because it's, as you said there, everything's sort of down to a situation, it's down to an upbringing. We cannot create one sort of overarching thing. Another key question which we can next encounter is the question of AI. And I think this has thrown a major curveball into this philosophical field of aesthetics. So many view AI as a threat to art. I do not personally. I believe that it's sort of
Neither.
threat which people say is quite sort of over pronounced and overestimated. However, Diane, we'll firstly encounter the question of, can AI generated art be beautiful and can it be meaningful, in your opinion?
Well, I think there's a couple of ideas there. The number one is, can AI create something meaningful? Yes, definitely. There's no question about that, I don't think. Can AI create something beautiful? Yes, again, no question about that. Can AI create art? I don't think so, because it comes back to the idea of something being unique, distinct, and sort of exclusive. And ChatGPT isn't either of those things. If I said, create me a painting with a donkey, and you put a painting with a donkey, and AI produces the same exact picture, then that's not art, right? Because it's sort of mass produced, readily available. And yeah, that's sort of where I'm at. I think it can create beautiful, meaningful things, but they're not necessarily art.
Yes, I
Unless the
agree.
AI is sort of your custom personalized AI. And then, we've got a different sort of game.
Even with that, I agree with you there. I don't believe AI actually is a threat to art, simply because when I think of art, art is an element of the human condition. Art has to be produced by humans, in my opinion, to be art. And the reason for that is because we value human creativity. And following on from this idea of art
Yeah.
being a language, we value this human creativity which expresses emotions which AI cannot express in the same manner. AI cannot express the emotions which Picasso felt when he painted Guernica amidst the Spanish Civil War, right? And I think simply it will never be a threat to art because we value human creativity. We value how
And
humans can do things wholly unpredictable with art, wholly abstract, but still portray a meaningful idea. A comparison I have,
yes.
for example, in how we value human creativity is photography. When photography, taking a photo, came to sort of be an art form in the early 20th century, artists at the time felt threatened, and rightly so. They said, "Well, these photographers can take a picture of something that's even more realistic than realism," for example. However, they started to realize that people still value human creativity and the human ability to express ideas in a way photography cannot, but art can.
Yeah, and I think there's another aspect of art which we have sort of ignored, and that art is handmade.
Oh, yeah.
In order for something to be art, I do think it has to be handmade. I think, again, thinking back on basically everything, what's the difference between this pen, who's a normal sort of big pen, and to a sort of Mont Blanc pen, is that this is mass produced by a robot in a factory, and that one is sort of hand painted, handmade, and hand assembled.
Yeah.
Same things with clothes. What's the difference between this t-shirt and a sort of designer dress, whatever that someone wears on a red carpet at the Oscars? It's that this is made en masse, probably in a factory somewhere, and that one is made specifically. It's handmade, hand done, so that it's for one person.
And people
Same
would
with shoes,
identify,
same with everything.
I see people would identify that dress as a form of art, as you said there. People commonly say that. Yeah.
Exactly. But no one will identify this plain t-shirt as a form of art. Why? Because it's mass produced, it's not handmade, and it's not exclusive. So I do think we've overlooked that aspect slightly. But coming to AI, I do think AI won't produce art because it can't be handmade, can it?
Yeah. And it links to this idea that I said of it can't result from humanity in a way, it can't result from the human condition or people. Perhaps a final question to sort of delve into is this idea of experiencing beauty again. Do you think this is a rational instinct, Dan, so based upon reason, or is it emotional, based upon instinct and feeling?
I do think it's an emotional, instinctual thing. Again, I'm going to come back to the fact that I do think beauty is instinctual to some extent. But that extent all changes due to your experiences. For example, you may have found, don't know, the sea very beautiful. But then someone you know has had a boat accident at sea and received serious injury. And you may hate the sea now. You think it's far from beautiful, it's dangerous, and it's a dark place. Again, some people, you may have found cars to be amazing, you may have loved cars, but then someone's in an accident, and then again, you have that sort of change. So I do think it's an emotional sort of reason. I think you look at your experience, your positive experience, and most likely you will associate positive things that have happened in your life with the sort of surroundings. So, for example, if you got married on a sunny day, you might love sunny days. If again, you sort of got your dream job on a Tuesday in the Bahamas, you might love the Bahamas. If, on the other hand, if you've liked something a lot, but then something negatively has happened, you're very likely to associate that negative thing to to the surroundings again. So the accident with the sea, the car accident as well. All of these things, I think, lead clearly to the fact that it cannot be a rational choice because these things are not rational. I find it. I'm still hoping that someone is going to explain to me how you having sort of you receiving a phone call saying you've got the job whilst in the Bahamas, when you've hated the holiday, suddenly turns into the best holiday of your life. You know, it has to be that sort of emotional thing that beats the rational.
Yeah, and that ties into Immanuel Kant's idea of disinterested pleasure, which is known by many to be his sort of perhaps greatest contribution to the field of aesthetics. And in this idea of disinterested pleasure, he said that we find something beautiful not because we want to, but simply just because of how it appears. Beauty is
Yes,
something that is by instinct, it just comes to. If we have to sort of go down this journey of understanding or trying to reason with beauty, it won't appear beautiful. However, I think the best art is the art which doesn't need to be explained. Is you sort of see it and you're like, "That's beautiful. I like that." And I
I
think
fully agree with you there.
any manner of explaining it sort of means that it loses its meaning to an extent. So yes,
I
I
do think that takes me to Slavoj Žižek, a sort of contemporary philosopher. Some of you may be aware of him. He said a very interesting thing, and that's that why do you love me is a very good question because the moment you have an answer to it, that's not love.
yeah,
Because love is something that cannot be explained. I think it's the same as beauty. If someone asks you, why do you find the sea beautiful? You can't really explain it. You can't really say, I find the sort of waves appealing. That doesn't really work. It's a thing beyond your mind. It is. It's there or it's not. It's not something that can be so in the middle.
yeah. No, yeah, I totally agree with you there. And so, to summarize the episode, today me and Diane have encountered and delved into this branch of philosophy, which is aesthetics. Therefore, we've sort of challenged ideas, whether that's rational, subjective, objective, intuitive, surrounding art and beauty, and whether art is something that we have an emotional response to, and whether it has meaning. So, yes, we hope you enjoyed the episode. Please do check out some of our past episodes. We've got many on philosophy, also many on art. With Matthew Olivier, we did a very good episode on Picasso and several other leading figures in art.
Thank you very much. And as always, do leave us a comment if you've liked the episode. Do leave us 5-star review and be ready for the future episodes of the podcast. Some very interesting guests, very interesting topics. I'm sure everyone will enjoy them. So thank you and see you next week.
See you then.